Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
In honor of Veterans Day, this week's episode is about 84 Charlie MoPic, the 1989 feature film about small unit operations during the Vietnam War, where a combat cameraman provides our point of view. I'm excited to welcome a star-studded panel of guests. First, writer-director Patrick Duncan. Pat, welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you.
Next, cinematographer Alan Caso. Alan, great to have you here.
Thanks, Kid.
And finally, rounding out our film guest is producer Michael Nolin. Michael, glad you could join us.
Thank you.
As regular listeners may be aware, before I worked as an assistant director, I was an Air Force combat camera officer. And so as co-host for this episode, I've invited two former colleagues from my Vandenberg Air Force days. First, returning to the podcast is Jim Stayton, who served as a career Air Force photographer from 1973 until 1996 and retired at the rank of Master Sergeant. Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you.
And making his below-the-line debut, Al Gerloff served as a combat videographer from 1982 until 2007, and also retired at the rank of Master Sergeant. Nice to see you, Al.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, and I'm anxious to get into it. But first, a warning to listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers for the film. You should go watch it. Last I checked, you could stream it for free on Amazon Prime, Hulu, and a couple of other streamers. To start us off and set some context, Pat, talk to me about the name of this film and explain to our listeners what 84 Charlie MoPic is supposed to indicate.
In the Army, like in the Air Force, you have a job designation. I was an 11 Foxtrot. That's an infantryman, reconnaissance. And 11 Bravo is a ground pounder. And 84 Charlie MoPic is the designation for a combat cameraman. What is the designation in the Air Force?
AFSC 252X3.
AFSC was the Air Force Specialty Code, and I was a 23571, I believe. Or I might have made it up. I'm not sure.
232.
Long
You were
time ago.
232X1.
Okay.
I think. Or X2.
23271.
No, you were X2. That was still photo.
Yeah.
Pat, tell me about taking this approach and sort of the conceit of the film, what you wanted to achieve by focusing on 84 Charlie MoPic.
Well, I wanted to write a Vietnam piece, and I was stuck to find a way to. I don't like the ones where it's rah, I'm a hero, or the kind of films where killing people seems to be heroic. And I wanted to make an intimate Vietnam film, and I didn't know how to do it. And then one day I was watching the news in Los Angeles, and there had been a horrible traffic accident. And there was a woman sitting on the curb. I think she just lost her husband. She had blood on her face. And the cameraman had gone on up there and stuck the camera in her face and said, "What are you feeling right now?" Which was rude and disconcerting and so intimate that I felt so sorry for her. And I thought, oh, that's the way to do it. Let's put a cameraman in there, because I'd seen a few in Vietnam. And then it became important that I do a sustained take, that the camera didn't cut away. No editing, because editing, the first time you see an edit, you know somebody's manipulating you. And it takes away some of the intimacy also. So I decided to do it in sustained takes, which became a problem.
But we only cheated once. This
Yeah.
is the Michael Nolan speaking. There's only actually one place where there's an internal cut. All the rest are just extended takes.
Yeah. And so we sent it around. I could have sold it a few times. Nick Rogue wanted to buy it at one point. A great cameraman, just remarkable. Director, too. And a few other people wanted to buy it, but I wanted to direct it because I knew that they would turn it into something, a regular film. And I went to Sundance with the Directors Fellowship there, or whatever it's called, the Directors Lab. And I had 5 or 6 famous DPs, directors of photography, tell me that it was impossible to do this. I'm really great.
They were older DPs, clearly, right?
No, not really. No,
Is that right?
some
my
of them were
gosh.
younger than me.
Wow. I was younger than you too, I think.
Yeah.
No longer though.
Even David Putnam, who was running Columbia Pictures at the time, said this is impossible to do, but he was good enough to give us $10,000 to do a proof of concept, which we shot in Griffith Park.
Yeah. I told Michael we should have shot the whole movie.
Could have shot the whole movie for 100,000. He's right. He's absolutely right about that.
And it was 100,000, wasn't it, Michael?
It was 100,000. Yeah, it was 100,000. Yeah.
So the proof of concept cost $100,000. Check.
Yeah. And we shot in the back lot and, just trying it out. But anyways, the cinematographers kept on talking me out of it. And one cinematographer who worked for Scorsese a lot, what was his name?
Michael Chapman?
Yes. Michael Chapman said, no, he took me to lunch to try and talk me out of it. And when we finished the film, I saw Michael Chapman at some function, and he came up to me and he said, "You were right." And that was so nice.
That was big.
Yeah, it was incredible. But nobody wanted to do it that way.
Yeah.
And various contracts came along that they said they'd do it that way, and then there'd be a musical soundtrack of pop songs.
Yeah.
That's when I gave them Pat's home telephone number, because they thought there's no first-time director that's ever going to turn down an opportunity to make his first film.
Yeah, and I refused. And then we had one that wanted me to cast all the sons of famous stars, Steve McQueen's son and Chuck Norris's son and people like that. And I refused that too. It was important that you not recognize any of these people, that they seemed real. But we had a long trek ahead of us. I wrote the script in a week, by the way.
It took me 5 years to get the money.
Yeah.
Had the three of you then come together through the Sundance Lab? Or Alan, when did you actually get involved? Michael, were you already there? When did the three of you become like the core of this film?
I was a stray dog that they picked up off the street, basically.
Well, I interviewed a lot of DPs, and they'd start talking about laying track or getting a crane and so on. Nobody wanted to shoot it handheld.
Except me.
Yeah.
You're the best handheld cameraman in the world. So
Yeah. If you take a look at TV afterwards, a lot of shows became handheld.
Yeah.
That's right.
After MoPic.
That's true. I mean, I had at that point 12 years of doing Steadicam. So I came from a moving camera kind of language.
Yeah.
And when we start getting information, I just want to go back on something that Patrick had brought up earlier, which was very, very crucial and center for this whole idea of how we shot this, is the fact that these were sustained takes, sustained handheld takes. And what that really did is it made everything in real time. So, just as Patrick said, you start cutting, the audience knows they're manipulated. And don't get me wrong, audiences expect to be manipulated when they go to the movies. They want to be manipulated because they want to go for the roller coaster ride. But that's not really what this film was about. This film was wanting to bring you there in real time and real space. And so by having these sustained takes, it made it very immersive to the audience. It made them feel like they were right there. Plus, we shot it with a lot of wide lenses, except I do these zooms every so often because, the cameras back then, they did have zooms. You had to zoom in, especially if you're doing any kind of documentary work. But most of the time, I was on a wide lens, and you felt like you were putting the audience right in the room. And that was the whole concept of this, is to put that audience right in the room, make it real time.
Yeah. Get as close to the person as possible and make you feel for them. It's just like when you watch the news.
Right. It's really funny because these guys hired me. This was my first job as a DP. So, and it's really funny because years later, I came to teach at Savannah College of Art and Design, and Mike Nolin was teaching there. And so the students always get a big kick when I tell them, hey, Professor Nolin, he's the guy who hired me for my first job. But he's really the two of you, Michael and Patrick.
Yeah.
I got to know Alan much better here in Savannah years later than I did, because he was actually hired to replace a cameraman that wanted to direct the movie. And
is that what that was about?
that's what that was about. And I mean, he was fantastic, but as you can well imagine, this is not the kind of set that you can have lots and lots of spectators, because they're shooting in every direction and you don't know exactly where they're going. So I've actually got to know Alan much better years later than I did during the shooting of MoPic.
I looked at a lot of DPs, some who became very famous. And I turned them down. And I looked at documentary cameramen, but they didn't quite get it either. Alan got it, and he was enthusiastic. And I knew it was going to be a really tough shoot because I'd spent some time at Sundance doing the same thing, and I was wearing out a cameraman every day. At Sundance, I got a lot of flack all the time. There's nothing better for a director, I think, than having to fight for your vision.
Yeah.
It really helps you refine it.
But it also helps you question what you're trying to do. And when you affirm yourself, you know you're on the right track. But
you find out what you're really trying to do.
Right.
And I got static for the first day of shooting. They give you, I had Aidan Quinn, I think, and Richard Brooks, two actors.
The first day of shooting at Sundance. This is like 5 years before we actually made the movie.
Yeah, the first day at Sundance, they give you some actors from BYU, these Mormon kids. I didn't know who they were, if they could act or anything, and I needed to form a team immediately. So I had all the actors play a volleyball game against the crew. And it became, they were young men, and so it became pretty vociferous and a little violent. And then I got them on set, and I had a team.
Right.
And I got a lot of static from the acting people at Sundance and a couple of others. Instead of rehearsing, I went and played volleyball. And Redford came into the room and stood up for me and said, "Leave the kid alone. He knows what he's doing." And after that, it was a little easier. The first time, it was amazing. Sundance is just such a great place. The first time I heard the script read was in a little room where they rented skis. And I had Sam Waterston, Richard Brooks, Aidan Quinn, Morgan Freeman.
Oh, my God.
And Hume Cronin.
Oh, my God.
And I'm sitting in the front row just watching and making notes, right? And when we started, there was like 4 people there. And when we finished, I turned around and the room was packed, standing room only, and people were crying.
Very good.
And I knew I had something. I just had to, keep on editing, which was a process through the whole thing. But
one of the interesting things about Sundance was that Pat got to make this movie with all females one day.
Yep, I did that on purpose. I asked for female actresses and shot it with females for a day.
Great.
I learned a lot there too.
Yeah.
The females were more into physical comfort and communication. And I remember when I was a squad leader that I used to go up to all my men and I was always putting my hand on their shoulder and touching them. because you can tell a lot about a guy if he's getting too stressed or if he's down or anything, just by putting a hand on them and feeling their heartbeat. And so I brought that into the next rehearsal and onto the set.
Yeah.
If you notice, the guys are touching each other a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
Especially Richard, the leader, is doing that.
Right.
One of the things I also want to say about that was a bonus when Alan came on this movie was that our original concept was to shoot this 1:3:3, like an old documentary format and stuff like that. And the distributor that finally was the last piece in terms of getting the money said, Michael, you can't do that. This movie's got to be a little bit widescreen. And because Alan was really an expert in terms of that stuff, I mean, from a producing point of view, that was his major contribution to this, was because it really allowed me to settle the distributor down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we shot in Super 16, which is a great format.
Which is really important for this, the look of this. It had just the right amount of grain, but still it was very cinematic. I mean, it had a very big screen look to it.
And the magazines were a lot lighter.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I reviewed the film over the weekend, and when I finished watching the movie, I said, "Oh my God, I am exhausted." I got exhausted watching my work. It was like, how could I have ever done that? No way I could have done that even 20 years ago.
You were young.
No, I was a lot younger. Absolutely. But it was exhausting, you know.
And I was brutal. I was very much a director in that I would be alongside Alan as he was shooting. I didn't use a monitor or anything.
I remember.
And I would just stand there and look over his shoulder and so on. And when we were doing movement, I would hit him with my hip.
Yeah.
Because he's a little too smooth in the beginning.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And one time I tripped him.
Yeah. My philosophy
and that's my favorite part of the
Oh, yeah. No, that's
film.
Great. That was
because
fantastic.
he falls and he keeps the guys in frame.
Right.
Bam.
Yeah. No, that was important. But it was really interesting because you know, I tried to keep it as smooth as possible because just the natural body motion is enough movement. But Patrick would definitely add a few more bumps and grinds. So, and it worked fine. It made it very human, made it very realistic.
I used to have to warn people in big theaters not to sit in the front rows.
Yeah.
Because they'd get nauseous.
Yeah.
Now, when you were filming like that, did you also have Byron Timms, who's playing the MoPic character? Was he there as well? I know there's sometimes you're filming and there's dialogue. How did that work on set?
That's really interesting that you asked that, because I loved the fact that they hired me for this film. And then when I found out that I had to basically play the eighth character, I completely freaked out. I started sweating and said, you know, I'm not an actor. I can't do this. And I actually had to memorize lines, right? They had an actor who was contracted with SAG, and he was the one who ended up being visually in front. At one point, Patrick, didn't you say you even want to keep my voice?
I loved his voice.
And unfortunately, SAG said, no way, you know, you gotta.
And then there was the problem of trying to dub Byron.
Yeah, right.
But I loved Alan's voice. Maybe I had gotten used to it. I don't know.
I think that's what you told me. You said you had gotten used to it. Yeah.
Well, it became this weird partnership because even though it doesn't look it, every camera move is rehearsed.
Absolutely rehearsed. Yeah. Right.
When to zoom in, when to pull out, when to make it a two shot, I storyboarded the film.
Yep.
And so you had to think, okay, there's no editing here, but if I was editing, I'd go for a close up here and then a wide shot here and so on. And we did that with inside the camera.
With inside the shot. Yeah, it was really important for us. We did rehearse every shot that we did, and quite a bit for a couple of reasons. First of all, we wanted to know what our shot was, but also we're shooting film, and you know, and you can't be shooting endless amounts of film because it's expensive. But we rehearsed all that stuff, and then the trick was to make it look like it was the first take every time.
Yeah, and that was hard on the actors.
It was.
Some of the actors had been with me on various tests and so on, for a few years.
Yeah.
And they were pretty locked into their roles. They knew them pretty well. Well, they knew them too well. And so I'd have to go to them and give them some last minute changes and upset their route there.
Which was good.
Yeah. And I remember we were doing, I think it was Nick's, Easy's little monologue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so mechanical. He'd just done it too many times. He'd worked hard the night before. He had it down too good.
Right.
And there's a lot of cursing in the film. And so I said, okay, I want to do a coverage for PBS or something, for television. I want to do television coverage so you can't cuss. So, give me the monologue like you were telling it to your mother. And that upset him enough that it came off perfect.
We ultimately did sell it to PBS.
Yes, we did.
Oh, that's funny. That's great.
Well, the helicopter, on the last day, the helicopter didn't get off the ground.
Oh God, remember that? Oh my God.
And
Well, I don't think that was the last day, though, was it? That was in the middle of the shoot.
the last 2 days.
I didn't
Yeah.
remember.
And we'd flown this helicopter in from like Vegas or something. That was the only place where we could find a Huey.
Right.
It landed and then it wouldn't get up. This is a great story. So we had a Teamster on set because we had to, unions. He didn't do anything because we didn't move anywhere. We all shot within a quarter of a mile of where we had our camp.
Yeah, that's right.
And so while we were there, I watched him take his engine out of his vehicle and clean it and put it back together and put it in. Now, we flew in some mechanics to fix the helicopter, and they spent half a day doing it, and they couldn't get it done. And then the guy came up, this young man, Teamster, and he says, "Can I have a whack at it?" And I said, "What the hell? Why not?" And we sent him over there, and he fixed it. That's after.
And we got a half a day of shooting, actually, because of that.
And to reward him, I gave him a ride in the helicopter. He'd never been in one before.
Oh, that's great.
But anyways,
I didn't know
so
that story.
we had the helicopter. Well, Michael was gone because we went to a meeting. Remember, Michael?
I don't remember what meeting it was, but yeah,
It was
true.
an AA meeting.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Michael was so upset he went to an AA meeting. And I took the time and I went out and we shot coverage of all the big scenes without the dirty words.
Oh.
That's how we got a PBS version.
American Playhouse.
And we're out there trying to think of, okay, what's a substitute for motherfucker? Mother trucker. And every bad word you can think of. It became a little hysterical because the guys are trying to think of words that would get a TV coverage. But we shot TV coverage and we had it. It was mainly audio.
Now, both Pat and Alan, you had background in television at the time, and specifically Vietnam. Alan, you were shooting on Tour of Duty, a show I actually remember growing up. And Pat, you were writing and producing over on Vietnam War Story for HBO. How did that tie in? And then as far as this work, and then Michael, some about how you managed to produce this film. How much did it cost?
The movie ultimately cost about $800,000, but we made the proof of concept for $100,000. And Pat said after we did that, you know what, if we had thought to ourselves, we could have made the whole movie for $100,000. But
yeah.
So we'll talk to me about those early days and how this came together and where you were filming such things.
I'll start with Pat's agent gave me the script. And I think I mentioned to you in the sort of preliminary that I was a very active Vietnam War protester. And once I read his script, I realized that, I mean, I wasn't pro-war, but I realized that I had been so naive in terms of what the soldiers' experience was and stuff like that. And so it became a real passion project for me. And I had been fortunate enough that I had been invited to the second think tank for Sundance and stuff like that. So I knew this was coming up, and I really, really lobbied for them to take Patrick. And I think Michelle Satter was the person that championed this. And
Frank Pearson.
oh, Frank Pearson, that's right. And I thought that having gone to Sundance, it would be like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, and I would get the money right away, you know. And that wasn't the case. And there was a certain point of like 4 years into this, I said, Patrick, I haven't raised the money for you. Why did you stay with me? And he said, because, Michael, you were the only one that wanted to make the same movie as me.
Right. That's important.
Yeah.
That's absolutely, everybody had to be on the same page for this, the uniqueness of the language of this film.
Yeah.
I mean, for myself, all during the 80s, I was a camera operator still professionally. That's what I did for, 12 years. And, I was an operator on tour duty. I wasn't the DP. And we had just come back from Hawaii. They were going to do the next 2 seasons in Los Angeles. And, yeah, that was a different show. It was completely a different, everything about it was different and wrong for what the language was of this. But the one thing that we did do on tour duty, that at least that first season, was that all that was handheld as well. So that was the only probably similar language, although there were a lot of cutting, and it wasn't the actual film language was different.
Patrick, who recommended Alan to you? Because was that Julie that brought him on? Julie.
No.
Jill.
It was John Wells.
Oh,
that would make sense. John Wells, I had some connection with him at something.
John Wells, I got to know at the Writers Guild, and he was very encouraging to me, to sticking to my guns and so on. And I think John recommended Alan, and then I asked around, and Julia knew some of his work, and who else? One other person, I can't remember.
But it's interesting because they knew my work as an operator, not as a DP, because I hadn't DP'd anything.
Yeah,
you guys were the first.
As a handheld operator.
I guess so. Well, Steadicam for sure.
You had a really good reputation as that. So
okay.
Well, the Steadicam intrigued me, but I didn't want to use Steadicam.
No, that wouldn't have been right for this. No.
But that's handheld, and I wanted somebody. There was a line of Hollywood tracks, Steadicam, all of that, and then documentary footage, rough and ugly.
Right.
And I wanted to find a place in the middle.
Right.
And I thought Alan Steadicam history would counter my tendency to go the other way.
Yeah.
You have to, as a director, know your own weaknesses in some way.
Yeah, the proof of concept that we had, that the actor, I mean, the cameraman for that, who we would have probably done the movie with, except that he was doing Pee-wee's Playhouse, and he didn't want to take the cut and pay. But we met.
Peter? Was that Peter? Peter? No, it wasn't him.
Anyway. And the proof of concept, the actor the cameraman falls down sometimes and stuff like that because he's and I don't know that, that would not have played in theaters and stuff like that. I wasn't part of the decision to hire Alan, but it was the best decision that I never made.
The interesting thing was that at Sundance, every day we would shoot. We would shoot a day and then a day of an analysis, shoot a day of analysis, back and forth. And then we had that proof of concept thing.
Peter Smokler, you're right. It was Peter Smokler.
Peter Smokler.
That's what I thought, yeah.
And I learned how far you could push it until it was just irritating. I did that on purpose to where it was too smooth, because one day I had him set up track.
Right.
I remember that.
It's boring as hell.
yeah. No, it didn't work. But I tested both sides of the spectrum on the camera work. And then Alan, on the first, we rehearsed for a week.
I remember that.
We had a week of rehearsal with
the camera.
with the camera and the
With the
and
camera.
the full
I
cast.
remember that.
Because we had to figure out, this is the weird part of MoPic, is nobody ever asks where the sound is coming from.
Right.
I guess they're used to sound on film. I don't know.
We kind of assumed that the microphone was attached to the camera or something.
Or something. We
Yeah.
we never addressed it. And we got away with it.
We did.
That was one of my worries at Sundance, and I had to test. But anyways,
I mean, I think
So-
that David Putnam would have given us the money if he hadn't gotten fired.
yeah, that was the guy who hired us for the test of the concept. But anyways, so we had a full crew. We had makeup, we had props, we had sound, we had a boom mic and a sound recorder, and that's a lot of people behind the camera.
Yeah.
So we had to figure out, how do you run through the jungle or the woods without all these people getting in the way? And that first week of rehearsal,
It
some
was
people
great.
bumped into each other.
They sure did. We had full-on crashes.
Yeah, but we learned what we could do. And our sound guy, I have to give him props.
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore, he was an old guy then. He used to be a jazz guitar player. So we bonded immediately. I love music. But anyways, he would put that recorder around his neck and run in the woods with us.
Oh, I remember that now. Oh boy, that's right.
And he would boom himself if he had to. I mean, he just did it all. And he asked for this microphone before shooting. It was a special microphone made in Germany, and it was expensive as hell. And Michael saw that and went nuts, and I went nuts. What, are we going to spend this on a fucking microphone? And Michael Moore said, I've been to the location. There's a lot of trucks going up and down that road that's only a quarter of a mile from you.
And where is this? Where did you film it?
Newhall.
Yeah, we filmed it in the shadow of Magic Mountain, actually.
Yeah, just north of Magic Mountain. It's in a shot, I think, just a hair of it in the final shot. I can see it every time. God damn it. But anyways, we're close to this road, and there was all of these agriculture trucks going up and down the hill, shifting gears.
Right.
And Michael said, I assure you, with this microphone, I can cancel most of that out. I said, oh, yeah, my fucking dialogue. Oh, okay. Because that's all we got in the film. It's just people talking. All I got is dialogue. So we bought him the microphone, and I think we gave it to him at the end of the shoot because he was able to literally, through some magical electronic fairy dust,
Yeah, he was amazing.
make all of my dialogue clear.
It's an amazingly directional microphone is what it was.
Yeah. And he was allowed to yell cut. I gave Michael Moore, the sound guy, permission to yell cut, because if the sound wasn't good, there was no point in doing the scene. And he did it about 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
He was great.
How many days of filming did you guys have on
We
this?
shot 3 weeks, I think.
3 weeks, yeah.
Wow, that's it.
6-day weeks, though. I think it was eight.
Yeah, so 18 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we used to go after a long day of shooting, then we'd go over about 5 miles away to a screening room and we'd look at the dailies from the previous day. Remember that? It was a long day for us.
Yeah.
A long day.
I roomed with the tech advisor in Newhall. And he and I would go to Vaughn's and get something for dinner, and we'd get the National Enquirer, and we were so fucking tired that we'd be giddy with laughter as we read the Enquirer at night. And then we'd go to bed.
Tell me more about your technical advisor, Russ Thurman, and his role on set.
Russ was indispensable. The first week of rehearsal, basically Russ put these actors through basic training.
Yep. And they would be, in the morning they do basic training, in the afternoon we would rehearse. And the first day we sat down with the scripts, they're in their fatigues, and they've got their weapons and everything. And about 35 minutes into the rehearsal, I had them ambushed.
I didn't know that. I didn't remember that.
I remember the actors telling me about that.
Yeah, they were really upset. I said, all bets are off. This is what Vietnam was like. You didn't know. You could be sitting there having a Coke and somebody's shooting at you. You could be out in the field just walking along and somebody's shooting at you. Remember this moment. When you go in the field, your radar is out every second. There's somebody trying to kill you out there. And they took it to heart, pretty much. They were very good about doing the training and everything.
Yeah, they loved it. It was like
Yeah.
true boot camp, and they embraced it wholeheartedly.
I found Russ Thurman doing Vietnam War stories for HBO, which was a half-hour anthology series about Vietnam. The first year, we had 2 producers that didn't follow into the second and third year, but the 2 producers hired Russ because he was a Marine and I'd been Army, and they thought that we would be antagonistic toward each other because they were trying to tamp down my influence. I think, being a vet, I wanted everything to be so accurate that nobody could complain. And that costs money. But anyways, so Russ and I met, and we're both Vietnam vets, and we just bonded instantly. You guys know how it works. You're just, part of the brotherhood, right? And so it was us 2 against them.
So it worked against them. So they all blew up in their faces.
Yeah. And Russ and I, we were having trouble on the set. We were 2 days behind on a 5-day shoot, and everything was falling apart. And Russ and I were sitting in chairs telling dirty jokes, and somebody from HBO came by and said, "How can you guys be laughing?" And Russ and I both said about the same time, "Hey, as long as nobody's shooting at us, we're okay." But I brought Russ along to MoPic, and he was invaluable.
Yeah.
Because every time the guys started to fall out of character, Russ would take them aside. And it was tough on us. Every time we killed a character, Russ and I would go off in the woods and we would cry for a little while. It brought up a lot of stuff that we didn't want to. But he was my partner through the whole thing. Good guy.
This film kind of helped a lot of vets through stuff, didn't it, when they watched it?
Yeah, we used to do screenings all the time for veterans groups out in West LA at the Veterans Administration and other places. I've done them in Utah, I've done them in Reno, I've done them in San Diego, and so on. Part of the problem with vets who have a problem is they don't talk about it. And this movie causes conversation.
So it helped them talk about it.
Yeah.
I lived for a summer with a Vietnam vet who had lost his arm. He would never talk to me about his experience. Never.
Yeah.
Which is why the script had such an impact on me.
I do think that writing is a way to cope, not just for myself. Part of when I'd go to vet organizations and talk to the guys, I'd say, write me a story about your worst day, or write me a story about your best day. Just write it down, and then we can talk about it, or not. But writing it down itself seems to help a bit. Well, you start getting objective and everything,
Yeah. And also, it's probably a way that when they write it out, they realize it's not quite the big monster that they've been thinking it was, or can at least confront that monster.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I'd get their stories and I'd ask them to write it again from the first person.
Ah, interesting.
It's better to do third person the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
But anyways, it helps some guys, I think. I hope so. The great thing about when we went to Sundance with the film was that some kid came up to me. He was like 17 or something. And he said, I have a question. And I said, yeah, what is it? He says, some of the guys die without any last words.
Interesting.
And he'd been taught with films that, guys lay there, bullet in their chest or something, and they have a little monologue.
Right.
And, I said, no, a lot of the guys, they just go. I said, interesting. I was thinking of enlisting.
Oh, God.
I said, well, think again.
Think again. That the location where we shot, there are also some real natural dangers.
Oh, yeah. Remember the rattlesnake?
I was just going to bring that up. There's this huge wood pile, massive wood pile. We don't know. It must have been some major cleanup that they had done 15 years ago, right? And it was like the ogre or the troll under the bridge. You never really saw it, but you heard it. You'd walk by every day.
Well, the first thing was I was going to shoot it use it in the background.
Right.
And I put the guys all in front of it, and start the rehearsal, and we hear this.
Right.
And everybody kind of jumps away from this mound, and Russ and I go look, and there's the biggest rattlesnake I ever saw in my life.
Massive. It had to have been 6 feet long.
Yeah.
If it was a foot. And it was there for quite a long time.
Yeah, every day we'd walk by it.
But I mean, I think the people from the Newhall Ranch had given us the background on it. This snake had been in there for years. I mean, it was a granddaddy. And they finally, during the tour duty show, because we went and used that same ranch later, they finally got it out, and I think they put it up into the hills or something because they need to remove the wood pile for some reason. So they rescued it out of there. I sure as hell wouldn't have wanted to been the person to try to get that snake. It was massive.
The other thing was I'd have to send every time I found a place to shoot. And we stayed pretty close to camp because the woods is the woods, right?
Right. Yeah. It turned 90 degrees and it's a whole different place.
Yeah. So I'd scout a little path or something, or a little spot. Then I'd send Russ in to make sure there wasn't any poison oak.
All right.
There was poison oak everywhere.
It was all over the place.
Ooh.
I think I actually did come down because I used to,
Yes,
when I
you
was
did.
a kid. When I was a kid, I used to get it awful. And then I sort of got immune to it, but I got a little bit of it.
Yeah, I remember.
Damn.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm still allergic to it.
The sets, we had a village and a base camp. And that's because in that year I was producing and writing Vietnam War stories. And I got permission from them to use the sets when they were done, not take them down, which they usually would have done. And I wrote into the script a base camp and a Vietnamese village.
That's perfect.
Which is great because I promise you I did not get Pat enough money for those two sets.
Well, speaking of money and how everything looked, when we were talking ahead of time, Jim Al and I, comments came up that the uniforms, the props, like everything is really point on. And Pat, you mentioned earlier about even when you were with HBO, they didn't want you to do all that. It's expensive. How difficult was it to get period accurate uniforms and equipment for your film?
It was difficult. The tiger fatigues were hard to find, especially the right sizes and everything, and multiples. We needed multiples. The weapons weren't that hard. Though we went at one point, I went to D.C. and met with the Pentagon to try and get Army permission, the cooperation to help us. And I sat down with a general, a little one. He was like 5 feet tall. Okay. And he said, this is all wrong, this script. Nobody carried these weapons in Vietnam. And I said, well, I did. And here's the pictures.
Oh my God. It was-
And he's still, no, it's wrong. And nobody in the Army cusses.
Whoa.
So he clearly had an agenda.
And I said, are you fucking kidding me? And he was
Oh my.
he was quite serious about it. And so we didn't get any kind of cooperation. The weapons were easy to find, a M60, the 16s, the Car 15. You know, they'd been used in some of the TV shows. And Tiger fatigues were hard to find, but we got those. And the wardrobe people were really good about getting them faded and everything. You know, the set worked because we stayed in so close there, and the village was perfect, except in the final scene, a helicopter comes in to pick up the survivors, and Richard Brooks, the actor playing OD, is in this hut, and he's got to dash out of it and run to the helicopter. And when the helicopter landed, it blew the hut over.
I remember that. Oh my God. I remember that. Oh, it's hilarious.
This is our hero hut, and
Yeah.
and so we
Oh my
put it
God.
back the way it was supposed to be, and they bungee corded it to the ground. And Richard's crouching in there, and I'm in there with him, and Alan's in there because he's got to follow him.
Right.
And there's a bungee cord in the way, but it's the only thing holding this thing up. And I took a knife, and when I yelled action, I cut the bungee cord. And the thing started falling on us, and we all ran out to the helicopter for the last shot. And we got it.
Yeah, that was good.
We got it and won. We had to. Because we only, after the helicopter didn't get off for a day, we had to do almost 2 days worth of helicopter shots in 1.5 days.
Yeah, that's right. You know, this was the only time in my entire career where I had to get into a costume, and the only time in my career where I actually had a dressing room. I was actually kind of embarrassed by it. I said, "Oh my God, I've got my own dressing room." And one of the two pictures I found, by the way, is a picture of me in my uniform.
Yeah. Well, he had to be in uniform in case we saw his hands.
Well, you did see my hand,
or
You
his feet.
quite a few times.
And his feet and so on, you know, his body. So he had to be in uniform. So he had to put fatigues on every day.
Yeah. It was kind of cool. I loved it. I loved the fact that I had to get into costume.
Yeah.
You know, Lynn Powell, who's listed as your costume designer, I worked with her on West Wing. She went on to have quite
yeah.
a career in the costume path.
Oh, all of our people were top notch. They were great. We had a great crew.
Yeah, we did.
They kicked ass for us. Didn't need them that often, but when you need them, you're desperate.
Yeah.
And they would come through every time. The biggest problem you have on these kind of shows, this is back when you used blanks in your weapons. Today, they've got all sorts of electronic devices that fake,
Right.
you know, gunshots and everything. But we used blanks. Blanks dirty up a gun
Oh,
beyond comprehension. And so they jam. And so I requested, and it cost us money, to have 2 M60s, right, for the days we fired, because he would fire off half a belt and it would jam, and we'd have to replace it with another one. And so the prop guy and his assistant had to be cleaning these things all the time. You know, they were great.
yeah.
I don't think we had any hiccups because of the crew.
And the armors were superb.
Oh, and our script supervisor. Script supervisor was this lady, this woman I'd used in war stories. She was great.
Is Christina Alcorn her name? I see that on IMDb, but
Yeah, she was a Southern belle, and she wore these big hats to keep the sun out of her skin and so on. And she had to run in the jungle and keep tabs of everything. And quite often the script supervisor is sitting there by the monitor in a chair, but no, she had to get out there and run with us.
Yeah, because there was no monitor. I mean, there was just
No,
she just had to watch.
she was on it every page. It was just great. And she went through rehearsal with us.
Yeah.
we rehearsed with the script supervisor.
Yeah, she was very helpful. She was very helpful and made some great suggestions even in our
Yeah.
blocking of the scenes. She was
Yeah.
helpful.
No, she was just everybody. I'll take a suggestion from anybody,
Yeah.
you know, and everybody, people would come up with great lines every once in a while. They're just, they were into it.
Yeah, I think the collective input, especially, I mean, you always had an idea of how you want to start the blocking of a scene, but then it was
Yeah.
that they became evolved because when we had a camera there, and then there was an evolution to that, and
Yeah.
a lot of people contributed, the actors as well, of course, they tend to do that anyway, but I think quite a few people were really helpful, and there'd always be some suggestion from somebody.
Yeah. My storyboards were mainly to find out what's important.
Yes.
Okay, this is the line I really need to get in a close up. This is the movement I need to get here, or whatever. The storyboards were for me. I don't think I showed them to anybody.
I think you showed me a couple of times, but you know what was really important, and I think what was so helpful is you always, whenever we'd start a new scene, you always started with what the kernel of the scene was about.
Yeah.
You always gave everybody a good idea of what this scene was about.
I think scripts are a series of big red dots. Each scene has a big red dot in it.
Mhm.
And that's what it's about.
You got to find that dot.
And there's text and there's subtext, and then you're hoping the actors or the cameraman or somebody brings in another piece, right? And so I had the text firmly in my head. I had the subtext pretty much figured out. And I was waiting for somebody else to come in and give me something else extra.
Right. Right.
And quite often they did. The actors,
Yep.
Alan, one of the crew members.
Somebody would see something.
Yeah, one of the crew members, I forget who it was, came up to me and says, do you see what Nick is doing with his hands there? And I said, no, I didn't. That was it. Next time I shot, we rehearsed, I watched his hands, and I nudged Alan and
Yeah, you give me one of the kicks or the nudges and say,
yeah,
the hands, and I go down to the hands.
yeah. No, Alan and I had a little communication, nonverbal.
We did.
If I wanted him to raise the camera, I touched his shoulder. If I wanted him to lower it,
I think you hit my elbow or something like that. Yeah.
and if I wanted to move in, I touched the top of his back.
We had a whole signal thing. That's right. I forgot
We
about
didn't
that.
use it much because Alan was pretty spot on, but every once in a while, and we learned a lot in that rehearsal week, and it all fed into the shoot. The shoot was pretty. I don't think we did more than 3 takes,
Very rarely did we do more than 3 takes, if ever.
and quite often I'd keep the first take and that'd be it.
Yeah. It's generally the case anyway, right?
Yeah. Well, it just you know it when you see it, and there's something about the first take.
Well, yeah, because it's the first take.
Yeah, the actors are looser.
Yep. Even if it's been rehearsed, it's unrehearsed because they know the camera's rolling, so it's the first time. So there's a certain.
But everybody steps up too.
I always liked the first take. I mean, I would often, like in the years that I did Steadicam, my first take usually on Steadicam was always the best. So if there was a big, long, complicated Steadicam shot, I'd just walk myself through it. I'd never put the Steadicam on. And directors would always say, or the DPs would always say, why don't you, look at it and say, no, I'd rather just walk it, feel it. Because my first take was always the best because it was instinctive. And I think that's true for this movie too, because.
And I could see when in rehearsal if the actors were getting too stale. And so I would start shooting a rehearsal and not tell them.
Right. And we'd get tail marks.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys were shooting that? You guys were shooting that? Oh.
Just trying to keep the spontaneity. It was hard.
And after a while, Pat, I think we almost were doing it often where we'd just you'd nudge me and say, roll the camera, and
Yeah.
Because of what you guys are saying, and I'm enjoying the heck out of this. You got those 5 to 7 guys, and they not just your film crew and the sound guy and everybody. You got these other guys. They're bunched together this whole movie there's no break from each other. There's no one who's standing alone. Everybody has to be together in this, in all these takes. And I see it better now listening to what you're saying, but it's like, that's a really tight group of people to be in there filming.
Yeah, and you have to give props to the actors. They were helping each other. They were really doing, and as an actor, as a character was killed off, they were taken away from the set immediately.
Yeah.
And they weren't allowed to come back.
Yeah.
And the other actors felt that loss.
Yeah. Even the crew felt it. I know I felt it. I felt it deeply when I didn't have an actor there.
Yeah.
Because we shot the whole thing in continuity, I think,
Yes,
didn't we?
in sequence,
Except for the helicopter stuff.
except for the helicopter.
But that was really important for us to do that.
The actors would help each other. You know, I'd see it, and it made me feel so good. I'd go and tell, you know, Jason Tomlins, Nick's having a problem here. You know, can you give him an assist? And he'd go over, and I don't know what they talked about, but the next take would be beautiful.
That's related to nothing. The actor that played Nick is a Jeopardy champion.
It's that's so funny. He's such a character anyway.
He's a nurse or a doctor's assistant.
Yeah,
now?
he's a doctor's assistant now.
Yeah.
But he won quite a lot of money on Jeopardy.
That's really crazy.
But yeah, the actors, they came up. They worked hard. It was rough on them at times. It was rough on Alan. Alan Caso went into the hospital after we finished shooting
That's true.
from exhaustion.
It was exhaustion. That's all it was. Yeah.
Well, you can imagine we shot all daylight hours. We get out there. We shot 10 hours maybe.
Yeah.
And there's no setup. Usually on a film, you shoot the scene, and then the crew comes in and strikes the set or moves it and so on. And there's an hour, hour and a half, sometimes longer between setups. We'd finish the scene. I'd go find a new piece of woods and we'd start all over again.
Yeah.
And we rehearsed with the camera. So it's never off his shoulder. So for 10 hours,
For 3 weeks.
for 3 weeks,
6 days a week.
Alan Caso had this camera on his shoulder.
Needless to say, I was in great shape by the end of the movie, except for exhaustion.
Yeah. And there's no cameraman around to take it off, give him a break.
No.
No dolly, no crane, nothing. Just on his shoulder every day. So my first thing in the morning after I went to see how the actors were doing, I go and see how Alan was doing.
Yeah.
But he was up to it. He was there.
Yeah. The other thing too is I had to constantly, I was still like in Mr. Operator mode, and I kept on having to remind myself, no, you're also the DP. Make sure you get the exposure right. Make sure you're taking care of that stuff.
Yeah.
So after a while, I carried my little spot meter like it was like my
That's right.
It was like a 45 on my hip. I had a little holster for it, and I'd pull it out, and I literally did everything with that little spot meter, that and bead boards. I'd have the grips going around with little bead boards just to bounce some light on everybody's face. That's how I lit the whole thing.
Yeah. That we bounce boards. I don't think we used a light once. I think for the night
we used
scenes.
lights for the night scenes, yeah. And I had
Yeah.
Richard Sands come in, who's a gaffer I had known very well, and he came in and helped me light the night scene.
Yeah, I didn't want that. A lot of night scenes just way overlit.
Yeah, no, we did it very sparingly, made it look like moonlight.
Yeah, that's the only light we use. We use the bounce boards a lot.
It's all natural.
Yeah, and it was very difficult because you have a black actor and a white actor. You can't light them separately. We don't have that facility.
No.
Yeah, Alan did a great job there. We sprayed the woods to make it look green
Okay.
because the foliage was dying, and we dammed up the stream to make that swamp. The swamp scene tickled the hell out of me. It was very hard for me not to laugh because they're struggling through this mud, right?
Yeah.
And Richard got stuck, Richard playing OD, and then Nick got stuck. And I had to yell cut because nobody could get out of the mud.
Yeah. No, and I think I got stuck behind all three of
Yeah.
them. And I think I said, "Hey, I'm stuck." And I think I think you put that in later. You had the actor say it.
Yeah.
But it was so funny because we had met before doing this podcast just to say hi and hey, what you been doing? And it was funny because when Patrick was talking about spraying the trees, it brought back memories of a movie I did 12 years before that called Roar, where I was working with all these big cats and stuff, and it was just up across the valley in Soledad Canyon. And, we worked on that thing for 4 years because you keep on, the cats never did what you wanted them to do. They're like house cats, only they're big giant cats. And, we'd finally get into December and we'd lose all the leaves and spraying the trees and stuff. And we'd have to finally quit. And then next spring you'd start all over again. But I remember when spraying the trees for Charlie MoPic, I started getting PTSD on Roar film because, and really up until about 7 or 8 years ago, I still have nightmares about the big cats. And so it's really traumatic. And so when he brought that up, I said, "Oh, thank God, that's right." And all during Charlie MoPic, when we were filming, I had the craziest nightmares about those damn cats. So I wasn't getting a lot of great sleep after working 10 out 12 hours, hauling a camera around. Crazy stuff.
I want to know what camera they actually shot the film with. And was there a prop camera that was different from that?
We didn't really ever see the camera, I think, in the movie that well, but it was an Eclair Super 16.
Okay.
An Eclair Super 16.
And we shot on Fujifilm.
Yes, we did. Shot on Fujifilm. And there was a bit of a problem. We had to have the Eclair slightly adjusted because Fujifilm is slightly thicker than Kodak. And I was worried about dust from the emulsion side building up and possibly scratching. So we had, I forget the rental place we got it from, but they took like a couple of millimeters less tension on the film gate so that it didn't press down quite so hard.
Oh,
And
okay.
because of that reason. And also the other thing about for doing that much extended hand holding, the Eclair was better than the Arri 16 SR, which had just come out. It was fairly new. We were using the SR on tour duty, and which is a better camera for hand holding ergonomically for short things. It just felt better, but for a long take, the Eclair was a better camera.
One of the problems was some of the takes were like 8 minutes long, longer, and we would have to see how much film we had to make sure it didn't run out in the middle of the scene.
Right. That's right.
One of the things that was very helpful in terms of timing of this thing was the Sundance experience, because we had these monologues where the character would talk, and there was one that came out to be 11 minutes long, and Patrick rewrote that scene in order to make it a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
You know what? Now that I'm thinking, I can't remember if it was an Eclair or an Aton camera.
I think it was an Aton.
I think it was an Aton, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Does that change everything, or can I just drop Aton in instead of Eclair on the things you said before?
Just drop Aton in there. I'm pretty sure it was Aton. Time and time it goes by. A lot of water under the bridge. No, I'm pretty sure it was Aton.
By the way, did I mention where the names came from? And
No, please fill us in on that, Pat.
Oh, yes, please.
Norse mythology.
Oh.
Od is Odin. Pretty boy is Balder the Beautiful, and so on. You're always stuck for names, and you get sued sometimes. I was sued by a guy named Holland for Mr. Holland's Opus.
Oh, is that right? How far did that get?
Nowhere, because it was called Mr. Herrick's Opus until Stephen Herrick came on as director. And I used Holland because I lived in Holland, Michigan. And remember your old computers, if you changed a word, it had to have the same number of letters.
Yeah, I do remember
Otherwise, it would go over or it'd leave a space.
Right.
right?
All the way down. It would
And-
trickle
and-
down. Yeah.
And Herrick, Herrick, had the same number of letters as Holland. And that's how it became Mr. Holland's Opus.
Perfect.
But so names, I just, use the Norse mythology.
That's great.
That was great.
Was Ordinary Bob based on a tribute to a helicopter pilot, or was that just
Ordinary Bob is what we called Robert Redford.
Oh, that's hilarious.
so it's an Easter egg, so
Yeah.
to speak.
He did a film called Ordinary People, and he tries very hard to be a regular guy up at Sundance, but he found it difficult, because he was in editing in LA when I was there, and one day he was there and we invited him to a picnic. We got some watermelons and so on. We were going to have a picnic on a weekend, and Bob says, well, can I come? And we said, yeah, of course. Yeah, come on along. So we're all getting ready for the picnic and everything, and Bob doesn't show up. He's usually late. Nobody's worried about that. And then all of a sudden, a helicopter comes over the mountain and lands by the ski slope. And Bob gets off the helicopter carrying a paper bag full of goodies and enjoying the picnic.
Classic.
And then when he was done, he got back in the helicopter and flew back to the airport and back to LA.
Hilarious.
Well, thanks for that knowledge.
Yeah, Ordinary Bob.
Yeah, he was great though. He made some phone calls for us, right, Michael?
Yeah, he did.
Trying to get it set up.
We had a lot of phone calls.
Yeah, he's the one who called Columbia, called Putnam, and said you should do this film, and so on.
He did. I mean, I had my own relationship with Putnam through my agent, but yes, Redford worked behind the scenes, and ultimately the majority of the money came from RCA Columbia, which was their home video division.
Oh, okay.
But Sundance and I don't think we would have made the film without Sundance and
Oh,
Robert.
there's no doubt about it. I mean, Sundance made this possible.
Sounds like it. I just want to tell all of y'all that worked on that movie, what a wonderful job you did. It is one of my all-time favorite movies. And it's one of the few movies where people don't, I try to explain what I did in my Air Force career. And they don't really get it until they watch the movie. Then they say, okay, I get it. It's the closest thing that I can use to explain to them something close to what I did, except I was never shot at. Okay, so shelled once in Balad, but I don't really count that. Those guys go through that like 4 or 5 times a day. I was just flying through and caught it once. But anyway, I just wanted to thank you. I think it was very important work that you did, Pat. The way that you developed the film and your site to do it with what they call found footage style, I think was just perfect, especially for a combat cameraman.
This is way before Blair Witch sort of made that style of shooting popular.
Yeah.
I think they copied y'all because Blair Witch came after y'all.
Yeah,
Way after us.
I know that I heard it was a really incredible compliment to this film. I heard years later, I was talking to this guy who had operated on some movie that Jim Cameron was directing. And of course, Jim Cameron's known for being kind of brutal on the set. And this guy, he was a camera operator and he was doing all this handheld stuff. And Jim Cameron finally just said, cut, God damn it. And he walked over to this guy and said, do you know how to handhold a camera? God damn it. This is the worst handheld stuff I've ever seen. You want to see a great film? You want to see a film that really will teach you how to do handheld? Watch 84 Charlie MoPic. And he told me about this years later.
Hoorah.
About Jim Cameron referring to our film.
It's still of all the movies I made, it's still my favorite movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. So I said, did you watch the movie? He said, yeah, I did. And boy, shit, that was good handheld stuff. It was a great way of telling the story. He said that story couldn't have been told any other way, like we all know. I mean, it's just the way to tell it.
I just really liked the fact that it wasn't, hoorah movie. It was realistic. It was about how painful that is to put people in a situation like that, especially young kids, and send them off to war to go kill other people that are young. And you made it look tasteless. You made it look bad.
There's an old adage that I heard before I made this film, that you can't make an anti-war movie. That the very visceral impact of the action makes young men want to do that.
Mm.
And I was trying very hard to show how ugly it is, how tedious it is, without, well, see, you can't make a film about boredom because you'd bore the audience, but being a soldier out on patrol, it's tedious and boring until somebody shoots at you. And so I wanted to make an anti-war film. I don't know if it worked or not.
The other thing I really loved about what Patrick did in the writing of this and the characters that he brought is that it also talks about the economics of the soldier that comes in to have to become a soldier. For a lot of Americans and for a lot of kids everywhere in the world who join their militaries, they do it because it's a chance. It's an economic advantage. If they can survive whatever the rigors are, they get an education, all that stuff. So this is about those other kids who didn't really have a lot of choices, that wanted to better themselves, that weren't pro or against the war. They were just, this is a place where they had to be in order to make themselves better. And I think that really comes across in this film better than probably 99% of the war movies you ever see.
That was me. I went in the Army because I wanted to go to college. I wanted the GI Bill. I'm the oldest of 13, factory workers, migrant workers. I've worked since the day I was 8 years old. And I went in the Army because I wanted a better life. And I thought the GI Bill was the way to get, and it worked.
Yeah. My dad went through that.
Yeah, it worked. I bettered myself, my situation. And I grew up. I mean, the trouble is you go in the military, you're 18, 19, you think you're bulletproof.
Yeah.
You haven't been out in the world. I'm all for reinstating the draft. I think that we live in a world where people are in their little bubbles now, and they don't. You get in the Army, the Navy, Air Force, whatever. You learn the asshole factor, that and the idiot factor. Every job you're going to have, there's going to be an asshole and an idiot, and sometimes that person's your boss.
Yeah.
And you're going to meet people from different races and different social economics places, and you have to get along with them. You have to become a team. You have to perform work together. And I think that's good. And I think we should have a thing where, I don't care if it's a civil service going out and fighting fires or going into the military.
Doing service is what you're saying.
Yeah. And you grow up.
I had flashbacks when I was in the Philippines. I was in the Philippines for 6 years with a combat camera unit. I just loved being out in the bush, and it was hard though. There's times you wanted to pass out. You got your legs stuck in mud. You lose your boots,
I was trying to get that across, that you have the mosquitoes eating you. You have the leeches eating you. You're hot. You're carrying 100 pounds. You're tired. And there's somebody out there trying to kill you. So you have to pay attention. And you can barely put one foot in front of the other. That was what the lieutenant was for, to show how hard this was.
I lived in the Philippines, 69 to 72 at Subic Bay, naval base there. When you brought up AFRTS, they have the radio going, and that lifeline to U.S. radio, and so talking about getting on Mars radio and talking to people back home. Those were all real things. And
Yeah.
so I that was just a personal thing. I kind of enjoyed that. That took me back home a little bit. And I wanted to make a comment that I noticed all during the movie, they were cleaning their weapons. There were constantly somebody cleaning weapons. And having lived in the jungle, around the jungle, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
big deal. Yeah.
Now, Michael Nolin didn't go in the military. He was a peace protester. I was when I came back. And a lot of the guys who didn't serve used to go up to me and say, "I wish I'd served." And I say, "I wish you didn't."
Well, I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, it was an ugly, ugly, nasty war. And war, and the first thing you learn is that it's not the soldiers who suffer the most. It's the civilians around.
Yeah.
I wanted to make a film that said, okay, killing people is not fun, which a lot of movies do. And being a soldier isn't all glory, but it's a job that people do to take care of the guy next to them.
Right.
That was it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We learned that every day on the set.
It was a great experience, I'll tell you that. It was a great way for me to kick off my career, my second career. So.
My favorite story is when the movie was over, we assembled everybody because Patrick wanted to thank everybody. And I didn't know Patrick, even though we had worked, I didn't know him that well. I mean, I just saw him as this tough sort of military vet. And we got all the people, and Patrick broke down. He was so moved that he couldn't thank him. And that is the favorite moment of my whole career.
Yeah, I remember that moment.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty emotional. The 5-6 years it took to get there. And then all these people helping you with something that you'd imagined, right? And they all worked so damn hard. And they did such a great job. I couldn't believe it was over.
I had one other thing I wanted to fit in before you wrap this up. I want everybody to know that Skid was our FNG.
No kidding, really?
Yes, that's correct.
That's hilarious.
And Jim was my boss at Vandenberg, and then Skid was
Oh.
our boss.
Oh gosh, that's
He's done
hilarious.
good, though. We're proud of him.
Also glad no one was ever shooting at us, but
Yeah.
those are some good years. One last note from me, as I also mentioned on the show before, my father was a veteran of the Vietnam War whose distinguished Army career lasted 30 years. He passed in 2020, and his birthday was Veterans Day. So I think about him a lot this time of year. He also really loved the movies, and I bet he would have really enjoyed this conversation. On that note, we'll call it a wrap. I can't thank you guys enough for being on the show today.
It was an honor.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Y'all made my day.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all our social media, so check it out. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. No one has bought a mug in a while, so I'm going to repeat that. The Iwo Jima-inspired logo, which should appeal to military and film aficionados alike, is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. After you've bought a mug or a sticker or a t-shirt, please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.